Okay, here's the test. If you have ever seen something like this before,
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
well, congratulations. You are officially old, just like me. Now, if you did not recognize that breaking news clip, just know that that is something your elders had to deal with in the days before Netflix and Hulu and any other streaming or on demand television. That kind of interruption happened whenever there was an important event that the TV network or the local station believed justified breaking into the show that you were sitting there and enjoying. Usually it was perfectly legitimate, like someone had just stepped foot onto the moon for the first time, or a war broke out, or the nuclear power plant down the road sprang a leak. So you might want to know about that. Just the same, the interruption could be really irritating. Those special reports always seem to happen just as the hero in the movie you were enjoying was about to fall off a cliff, or just when an impossible game-winning Hail Mary pass had been thrown in the closing second of the championship with the receiver in the end zone reaching up, and at that very moment, we interrupt this program. Really? None of us appreciate interruptions. Unless to find out we won the lottery or something. But I had a friend. He worked in a grocery store. His job was restocking shelves while the store was open. But the thing is, all during his shift, he was constantly being interrupted by people who couldn't find the Dijon mustard or the free-range bacon or whatever. And yet, he was the most patient and gracious guy in the world. He'd walk that customer over to whatever it was they needed, then go back to stocking shelves until 10 seconds later, someone needed to know where the store had moved the French fried onions after they had been in the same aisle for 50 years. Where did you move them? I told him that all those interruptions would drive me nuts. There'd be no way I would have that kind of patience with people. I'd probably tell him to just read the signs hanging from the ceiling and point in that general direction and then get back to my real job, stocking shelves. And he said that at first, all the interruptions did bother him because he understood his job to be stocking shelves until he realized that handling questions from customers and solving their problems was his real job. Stocking shelves was a distant second. He said that it all had to do with intention. If his intention, his plan, was to be a shelf stalker, then yeah, he would not be a happy camper because the interruptions would mess with his plan. So he adopted the intention of helping customers no matter what. And with that plan, he was very happy indeed. Well, one day the Gospel of Mark tells us Jesus had a plan. His intention was to go to the house of a man named Jairus, whose daughter was on the brink of death. Jairus was the leader of the local synagogue, very important guy in town. And the fact that he had asked Jesus for help in the first place was pretty amazing in itself. Because for someone like Jairus to seek help from someone like Jesus, that would be like one of us driving our loved one who just broke a leg right past the emergency room and going way out into the country to see a witch doctor holding tent revivals involving snake handling. Because that's what the proper people in the synagogues thought about Jesus. But even if Jairus represented the kind of folks who had a problem with Jesus because he was always breaking the religious and social rules of the day, on this day, Jairus' daughter was dying. And he had heard stories about Jesus. And so Jesus set out at his request with a large crowd gathering around to see what would happen. They had heard of Jesus too, and they were eager to see if what they had heard about him was true. So that was the plan. But on the way, Jesus is interrupted. In the press of the crowd, he can feel that someone has touched him in a way that went beyond the jostling of the curious townsfolk. It was someone he knew who needed his attention in that very moment, in the midst of whatever his plans were. And in that moment, it became not an interruption at all, but a moment of salvation. It was salvation because the unnamed woman who touched Jesus had a flow of blood for 12 straight years. Now, what Mark's describing here is a constant menstrual flow. She probably had what today could be corrected by an outpatient procedure, but this was the first century, and she had gone from one doctor to another, seeking relief from her condition to no avail. The thing is, her condition wasn't only physical. It made her an outcast from society, from her community, and from her family. Here are the words from the Jewish law that was in effect at that time, from the 15th chapter of the book of Leviticus. It says, "If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstruation, all of those days she shall continue to be unclean. Every bed on which she lies shall be treated as the bed of her impurity, and everything on which she sits, and everything that she touches." In other words, if you happen to touch or be touched by this woman, even if you pick up a utensil she has handled, then you are ritually, socially, and religiously unclean, and you would need to undergo a long and costly purification ritual. I know. Seriously? So that makes this woman an outcast, socially as good as dead, whose life has been interrupted from having real, normal interactions with friends, family, and loved ones for 12 long years. Now, among many other examples, this is one of the reasons, my friends, why we no longer follow the book of Leviticus. It's truly irrelevant to us. It only still exists in the Bible as the prime example of how people can turn religion into a set of completely absurd rules and regulations that only cause pain and anxiety. God did not write Leviticus. It was written by a bunch of warped old men living in the ancient world who elevated their own importance by controlling people in God's name. Aside from being a religious artifact, it has no meaning for us today. If we still followed those laws, we couldn't wear blended fabrics or eat a cheeseburger, and if your daughter got pregnant before getting married, she would be stoned to death. And yet, a lot of knuckleheads still like to quote from Leviticus to justify their negative beliefs about gay people, for instance. It's so dumb. Have you ever read The Handmaid's Tale? That dystopian, male-dominated, authoritarian world is what the book of Leviticus looks like. Even Jesus thought it was dumb and outdated, and that it didn't reflect the true loving nature of God. And he proved that by just ignoring Leviticus practically every day of his life. So this woman wasn't merely suffering from a minor medical condition, it was a living hell. It's as if she represents anyone who through no fault of their own is ostracized, cast away, and scorned. Her entire life was an interruption of anything resembling normal until she interrupted Jesus. To one degree or another, we all experience interruptions. Our intention is always for things to flow smoothly from point A to point B to stock the shelves. But then someone gets sick, we lose our job. The application we pinned our hopes and dreams on is rejected. A relationship goes south. We end up spending our time and energy not according to plan, but reacting. And that feels a lot like chaos and hopelessness. Sometimes we don't even have time to construct a new plan of action because another interruption crops up. So we can feel as if we're in a constant mode of reacting and treading water, and life seems to have us on a leash, taking us down paths that we never bargained for. Collectively, of course, we've all been through a massive interruption. 16 months ago, life as we knew it came to a screeching halt. Those early days of the pandemic were especially weird. Now, everyone's unique and it has affected people differently, but believe me, there are a ton of wounded and traumatized people among us right now. And we'll be sifting through the emotional wreckage of COVID for a long time, even as we've begun to celebrate emerging from the immediate shadow of it. I don't know if anyone truly got used to the new normal of COVID, because it wasn't normal, and we're still just doing our best to figure out how to respond every day. So, if interruptions happen to all of us, if they're just part of life, how can we move from treating them as interruptions to understanding that in the midst of whatever pops up to pause or to foil our best laid plans, that life is still full of goodness and grace and peace and healing and even salvation? Well, this story about Jesus might give us some pointers. He was interrupted, but he demonstrated that whether you're a really important person like the leader of a synagogue or you're an outcast on the street, the response is the same. He is there to meet you where you are and to meet your need. He's there to provide the touch and the word of wholeness and love. He's not only there to take care of the plan for that day, to tend to a dying child, but he's present in the pain and the isolation of a person who only dares to touch the fringe of his cloak. He provides a moment of salvation when it was a moment no one had even planned on. And what about that little girl, the daughter of Jairus? And the delay of attending to the women on the street, the word comes that the little girl has already died. And for Jairus, that's as bad as it gets. You get on your knees and you beg for help, and it comes too late. You give up all your cherished beliefs to take a chance on this itinerant faith healer, and it all comes to nothing. Because of an interruption, there's no hope. His little girl is already dead. But then Jesus says something incredible to this grieving father. Don't be afraid. Keep on believing. Keep on believing that in the interruptions of life, I am right here. That even in those moments that seem the most hopeless and the most powerless and the most desperate, I am right here. And Jesus goes into the house right past the mourners already gathered outside, waiting for the funeral to start, and he commands the little girl to get up because it's time to eat. The interruption of death, interrupted by the power of love. For the woman on the street, for the daughter of Jairus, and for Jairus himself, it was precisely in those moments of interruption that the gift of life was given. You probably heard it said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. Maybe that sums up this story and our story. Our plans, our intention, our normal, whatever that is going to be interrupted by life, because life and love and healing still happen in those places we never planned on it to happen. It happens when our intention has been sidetracked and we say, oh, this is the reason I'm here in this moment and in this place. Even if it's as mundane as to go with someone looking for Dijon mustard when I thought my job was to stock the shelves. It's not. Our job is to live into the interruptions, to be fully present in them, because it's in the helping, it's in the meeting of the need of someone else in that moment. That's where life happens. It's in the hoping in the face of hopelessness that healing happens. It's in the unplanned, unintentional interruptions where we go from being lost to being found. It's in the presence of giving and receiving love when none was ever expected that we're truly alive.